In this video, let's discuss the MIDI editor. The MIDI editor could be the most important tool we have when programming drums. Now there's two different modes of viewing the MIDI editor. One is called the docked mode, and the other is called the standalone mode. I prefer to use the standalone mode when programming drums, but I'm going to show you both right now. The docked mode can be accessed by clicking this arrow here. As you can see, it docks the MIDI editor in our edit window, and there's not a lot of space to work in, so I don't find it ideal for this situation. To get to the standalone view, you can click on Window and scroll down to MIDI Editor. Now, as you can see, you get an entire dedicated window. And for programming drums, it's key because we have a lot of different instruments that we want to program. So we're going to need the space to be able to access and see all of our instruments. The other way to get to the standalone mode, you're going to select an area within your instrument channel, right-click, and open in MIDI Editor. Both of these functions will work on PC and Mac. Now, once you get into the MIDI editor, you're going to notice a lot of the same tools and functions that we have in our edit window. We can solo or mute our track. We can work in notation mode. We have a zoom, trim, selector, grabber, scrubber, and pencil tool. And we can also use a smart tool. Now, the pencil tool is what we're going to use to actually write in our MIDI notes and program drums. In this section here, we have the name of our instrument track. If we had multiple instrument tracks, we'd be able to select and view each different one. But for now, we only have one. And this is the MIDI note duration. Now, I like to keep it in 16th notes for programming drums. So as you can see, when I write a note, it does so in a 16th note duration. If I change that to, say, quarter notes, when I write a note, it writes a quarter note duration. This number here represents the velocity of each note I draw. So I've drawn 6 notes here, and they've all come out at the same velocity. Now you can see this in this track lane here. If I click on the note, in the left-hand side here, it tells us our MIDI velocity number. And 80 is the default and a very good place to start because it's right in the middle. The hits won't be too hard or too soft, and we'll manipulate that later to create a realistic drum sound. Now, while we're in this track lane here, when you click, it has a drop-down of different aspects you can change in your MIDI notes. For programming drums, we mainly want to focus on velocity, but you do have some other options here. So if you're creating other MIDI tracks, it's good to know that track lane. Now, up here we have a play MIDI notes when editing function. Now, that function is going to actually allow us to hear the notes we're writing. Now, that's important when we're only using a pen tool in programming our drums. But say we want to select a large section of notes, you're going to get that effect. So we can easily turn it off, select some notes, without having to hear all of them at once. So this is a good tool to know as well. Now, the mirrored MIDI editing function is an important function to know and be aware if it's engaged or not. Mirrored MIDI editing is simply put, if we have a section, say we have this verse section here, and we're going to duplicate it and paste it somewhere else in our song. If I double click this, it's going to open our MIDI editor. And if I engage the mirrored MIDI editing and make any edits in this region, it's going to make the same edits in that other region. So if I decide I want to create double all the notes and I close this, you're going to see in this second region that is also named the same because it's the same region, the same edit has taken place. Now, if I turn this off and I delete some of our notes, it didn't make that change in our other region because the mirrored MIDI editing function was turned off. So this is going to be a good function to use when we want to make sure that we're doing the same thing to every chorus we use or verse we use. But it's good to know that if you do copy and paste sections, which we will, and you have that engaged, you're going to be editing all of those at once. Now we have our modes. We have a shuffle and spot mode, which we probably won't use, and a slip and grid mode. Grid mode, when I draw a note, it's going to snap that note to the grid. If I'm in slip mode, I can draw a note anywhere I want. Now I can also edit the notes in slip mode and grid mode as far as dragging them around. And if I put it in grid mode and I drag these notes, they're going to snap right to the bars. And this section here allows us to turn the grid on and off. I generally keep my grid on all the time. I like to see the grid lines. The note here represents our grid resolution, which is going to be important in quantizing notes. And I'll talk about grid resolution in the next video. The last thing I want to mention is that on this side here, we have a piano roll. And if you click on the piano roll, each note represents a different instrument. And this is a good way to be able to audition notes without drawing a note in our MIDI editor. But you can also do so by drawing a note and dragging it. And we can change the color of our MIDI notes very simply here. So in this video, we discussed the MIDI editor in depth, both standalone and docked view, some of the functionality within the editor, and tools within the editor, our piano roll and auditioning instruments, the track lanes, our grid and some of the tools associated with it, such as MIDI note duration, play MIDI notes when editing, and we also discussed the mirrored MIDI editing function. In the next video, we'll discuss grid resolution. Thanks for watching.